So welcome to our input on high quality learning experiences in ELC. In this presentation, we will share our approach to providing high quality literacy experiences for all children through the implementation of the Workshop for Literacy approach from an early years perspective. So meet the team. I am Lisa King, Principal Teacher here at Galatown Nursery and Fair Isle Family Nurture Centre. And we have Jodie Lynch.
Hi, I'm Jodie Lynch and I'm Early Years Lead Officer at Fair Isle Family Nurture Centre.
And we have Kerry Gray.
Hi there, I'm Kerry Gray and I am the Early Years Lead Officer for Galatown Nursery and Fair Isle Family Nurture Centre.
So just a little bit about us. So Fair Isle Family Nurture Centre expanded in August 2020 and we now have two sites. We have Fair Isle Road and we have Appin Crescent, and both sites provide a range of different sessions for under 3s and 3 to 5s. We currently have 138 pupils and 36% of our children are SIMD 1 to 3, with 10 care experienced and 15 additional support needs children. Galatown Nursery expanded in August 2019 and is now a split campus of 2 buildings linked by a lovely outdoor space. Again, we offer a range of provisions for unders, 3s and 3 to 5s, and we have 122 children, with 52% of our children SIMD 1 to 3. We have 3 care experienced and 14 additional support needs children. So in this presentation, we are going to cover why this became a priority for us, the implementation of the Workshop for Literacy, providing high quality literacy experiences, the development of our Workshop for Literacy book plans, and a look at our spaces, interactions and experiences, along with our moderation with our Primary 1 feeder schools. So why a priority? So in our settings, we meet with our staff 3 times a year to do what's called learning consultations. And this is where we discuss where our children are and what their next steps would be. It was during these learning consultations that practitioners shared that they weren't confident with the E's and O's across literacy. So for example, they weren't sure what I can name core phonemes was. So that was one they were avoiding when setting targets for next children. Practitioners also fed back that they were for the outcomes that they were confident with. So for example, rhyme and alliteration, they were looking for different activities that could support them to meet those outcomes for a broad range of children. Data gathered from our moderation activities with Primary 1, which I'll go into more detail later, showed that the baseline data, children who had previously gone up to Primary 1 were sitting below average for letter sounds and letter formation. Following on from the COVID pandemic, we also highlighted the need to raise the profile of the importance of daily exposure to high quality stories, songs and rhymes, and how we were ensuring that all of our children were getting access to a daily story. So the first thing was to look at the Workshop for Literacy approach, and what we wanted to do was extend practitioners' knowledge and understanding of literacy skills to enable effective planning of early learning experiences for our children. And it was really important that we were looking at this from an early level approach. So it wasn't it was how could we incorporate the skills from Workshop for Literacy and the daily practice that we already do in nursery. So the first thing was to look at a contextual assessment, so the starting point. What do our learners need to learn? What are their strengths and what are their development needs? And we had identified that our children had varying literacy experiences. A lot of our children had limited access to books and rhymes, whereas some of our children were actually at the stage where they were needing provided with challenge, especially those children who had taken up their entitlement to additional year in nursery. We wanted to look at the responsive learning and teaching. So in nursery, we do daily responsive planning already, but how could we link that to the skills from Workshop for Literacy? We wanted to look at the meaningful context. So we had that inclusive approach. We have a lot of children who do have additional support needs. So how are we going to cater to a different range of abilities? And how are we going to use rich text and stories to get learners interested in books and activities that followed? engaging stimulus we were looking at. So again, this was following up from the staff around that activities. What could we be doing once the children had heard their high quality story and had that input? How could we then provide different activities linked to that story across the curricula, including the use of ICT? And how could we provide those daily opportunities to exposure to rhyme and story? And it was really important that these were not to be teacher initiated, it was to be EYO initiated, it was a part of their daily practice, and we were not looking for them to be teaching, it was to be looking at how the work that we were already doing could be linked to the skills from Workshop for Literacy. So one of the first things that we did was looking at breaking down the benchmark. So as I previously said, some of our staff were saying they were unsure of the outcome that says that they could say some of the core phonemes. So it was really just speaking to staff around that and saying that it is just the single sounds. And helping staff to develop their confidence in producing those sounds. So some of our staff had never heard of Jolly Phonics. They weren't sure how that was taught in primary one. So we did a wee bit around that, and we were asking staff just to say the sounds, the letter sounds, and actually some of them were pronouncing them incorrectly, and it was just habits that they had picked up maybe when they were at school that had never been corrected. So for example, saying le for o or n for n. So it was really important that we had that discussion, and then we looked at how we could incorporate activities linked to the stories that children had read across the playroom. So it might be putting some mirrors out so they could look at the shapes of their mouth when they were saying sounds. It was looking at getting them to repeat sounds in a book. So if they were reading a book about a snake, they could be saying s, and what other things could they find in the playroom that started with this sound. So it was really looking at different activities. And again, it wasn't a teaching input. They weren't sitting down doing the Jolly Frolic song. It was, how can we incorporate this to the activities within the nursery playroom? Again, we looked at letter formation, and this was from the feedback from the primary one baseline data. And we know it's really important that children learn the correct way to form letters, and it's really hard to get out of the habit of forming letters incorrectly once they've started. So we did a little activity with the practitioners in both settings where we asked them to write the alphabet, and we got a whole range of different responses. Some people wrote them all in uppercase, some wrote them all in lowercase, some did a mix of both. So we had that discussion around really modelling. When we're modelling this to children, it's important that we use capital letters where appropriate, and that we are teaching children to write the lowercase letters as well. It was also looking at the letter formation. So some of our practitioners were surprised that letters didn't start at the bottom and that they always start at the top. So again, it was the habits that they've maybe got into as children that have never been corrected. So we were looking at the importance of modelling that with our children. And again, what activities could we promote for mark making throughout the provision? So how could we make our writing area more inviting to encourage more children to access this? What opportunities could we provide for mark making throughout the core provision, both indoors and outdoors? Letter sounds, so I've already touched on this, but just that importance of modelling the correct letter sounds and looking at how different sounds work. So you've got your soft sounds and your hard sounds. If you put two sounds together, it's making a different sound. So we had a chat around that with the staff team again, and it was just building their confidence around that when they're modelling it with children. And looking at when children say these sounds, so linking in with the speech and language sounds assessment. When should children be saying sounds? Because some of the practitioners were coming to us and saying, I'm really worried about so-and-so's speech. They're not saying these sounds, but actually there's some sounds that children won't be saying, like their R sound. It's not until they're primary 1 or 2 that we would be expecting them to say that correctly. So I am now going to pass on to Kerry, who's going to talk a wee bit more about the workshop for literacy planning that we created.
Thank you, Lisa. So like Lisa said, I'm going to talk about our approach to using the Workshop for Literacy skills to incorporate the literacy E's and O's from the Curriculum for Excellence. So to support practitioners in ensuring a breadth of learning across the literacy benchmarks, what we did was we created this master tracker which connected the core literacy skills from the workshop for literacy to the listening and talking, reading and writing, E's and O's. And for E's, we also coded these to each of the 3 categories and then differentiated the learning between early initial engaging and early progression. This was to give practitioners an easy overview when it comes to identifying what skills they are focusing on. And it was also a useful tool for us to establish what skills staff were less confident in using, so then we could support them through additional training or inputs or just modelling how to do that. This tracker can then be used to create what we did for a book plan. So the book plans, as you can see from the left column, they look at the skills from the workshop for literacy. And then in the next column, the E's and O's identified under each of the skills have been recorded, and we're split into semantics, which is the understanding, phonology, which is sounds and words, and orthography, which is writing. Under the learning experiences, we then focused on how these E's and O's and skills are going to be achieved. Practitioners are really becoming skilled in using and creating book learning cards, and I'll speak about that in a little minute, to provide the setting with a vast range of high quality literacy experiences that all playrooms have access to support intentional or responsive planning. So in order to drive forward the preparation of these workshop for literacy planners and resources, we felt it was imperative that practitioners were provided with leadership opportunities to actually take ownership of this. So we created a language and communication working party whose role was to gather the data, consider key documents and our strengths, and then identify the next steps. This then led to the workshop for literacy grab and go bags, which were created by them. So inside the bags, they included book plans, a learning card, resources to meet the outcomes recorded on the learning card, and are readily available for staff just to basically grab and go. And this also came about from practitioners, because what they reported was that when they were wanting to do an activity, the barrier was finding the resources. So this is helping to reduce that barrier. And staff also are given opportunities across the year to create learning cards for intentional promotion events, and therefore are becoming pretty skilled at creating and using them. So going to the book learning card. So learning cards generally within our settings were used during COVID as home learning cards. And the basis of it was to ensure that we're offering the children access to a broad and general education. So we've continued to use them, and we do create them, as I discussed, for intentional promotion activities, and feedback from staff is really positive. They found them really easy to use and a rich resource to have. So this is why we decided to incorporate these into our book plans as well. So this provides practitioners with an opportunity to use a book to not only plan the literacy experiences, but experiences across the other curricular areas, again providing that broad and general education. We then moved on to looking at our spaces, and it was really important for us to consider these to ensure that they were communication friendly, literacy rich, with a range of provisions which stimulated curiosity, creativity and inquiry. To do this, we used a core provision document, Tina Bruce's Essentials of Literacy 0 to 7, and the Up and Away document. And this helped us create a literacy audit to help guide evaluation of the playrooms. So to start with, myself and Jodie used the document to audit each of our 6 playrooms. We evaluated each of the areas and then provided feedback to the playrooms through a 2 stars and a wish approach. This audit has now been incorporated into our yearly quality assurance planner, and as part of this, playrooms teams use this to do a literacy audit in their playrooms. We also had feedback from staff that, yes, they can do the audit, but they didn't have the time to create and complete an action plan. So we've also added this into our quality assurance yearly calendar as well. So going back to after the first time that Jodie and myself did the audit, it was very much, we were finding a number of patterns which were helping us to reflect on the resources that were within the rooms. In particular, we found it important to have books at each of the areas to stimulate interest, conversation and curiosity, but also find that our resources were not reflective of the multicultural society that we live in. And this was one of the main wishes for many of the playrooms. So as part of our journey, we also looked at how stories were being delivered. Through our playroom observations, it was clear that there was perhaps an inconsistent approach to children receiving a quality story, and that practitioners perhaps had different expectations from the children. Therefore, to ensure that all children were accessing a quality story every day, we produced these top tips to a quality story. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will touch on some of them. So first of all, it was really important that practitioners knew that when they were reading a story for the first time, that they read it all the way through from the start to the finish. Secondly, it was looking at planning a story. So not picking up a story 10 minutes before story time, but actually thinking, what am I going to read today? Have I read the story? What groups is it age and stage appropriate for? What follow-up questions or activities am I planning from this? Again, looking at the experiences to meet the needs of the children within the playroom as well, considering the size of the groups and the time that we're asking children to sit, really having that consideration of the age and stage of them. Do they all need to be sitting in the same with their legs crossed? Can they bring a fidget toy? So it was really to get staff really to reflect on their approach and ensuring that they had a consistent approach as well. We also looked at using the smartboard as a really rich resource, but it was looking at it to see what was the purpose of it, what are the children learning, is it for one child, a small group of children, or is it appropriate for showing everybody? So to ensure that every child was accessing a story, we provided a tracker for the rooms to track what kind of story they were accessing and how it was being delivered to them. This helped the playroom staff to identify whether any children were not accessing a story and really have a reflection on how could they give a hook to that child for them best to access that story. So I'm going to finish on a wee note, which I think is quite powerful. It's important to consider that if a term time child is with us for 2 years, 5 days a week, then potentially they will have heard a minimum of almost 400 stories before they leave us. So a further consideration of us are children actually able to access books at home and being mindful to our demographic. And now I'm going to pass you on to Jodie, who will talk about this within her language and communication slides. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Kerry. So quality interactions. Skillful practitioners are aware of the different developmental stages of all our children. Practitioners provide appropriate support and challenges through quality interactions daily. Practitioners also utilise Boardmaker, Sign Along, and they use positive body language to enhance the interactions with children. All staff have recently completed refresher training on language and communication that was linked to SEIC, and talking mats were created for each playroom as a point of reference. The talking mats highlight golden rules for interaction, universal interventions such as communication high five, sign along, and ellipse. As Kerry touched on before, we created World Book Day cards, which support a breadth of learning across the curriculum, developing knowledge and skills of the 4 capacities for the Curriculum for Excellence. Practitioners are useful to support their intentional promotion planning, and they can also be referred back to at later date. UNCRC, a termly focus. Copies of bedtime and toothbrushing routines were shared with our parents and carers, and the lending is promoted for children and families to read bedtime stories together. This supported 31 of the UNCRC for all children having the right to rest and relaxation. Communication for parents and carers. As a universal approach for all our children and families, communication literacy were developed through interactive learning experiences, community partnerships, experiences. So we'll touch on it here and I'll go a bit more into detail. We've got our communication language group, our library memberships, our weekly visits, and shared information with parents. So our communication and language group. Targeted children were identified with ellipse observation and Leuven observations, professional dialogue, and parental concern. All identified children and parents were invited to attend a communication high five group. And each week there was an enriched activity surrounding the 5 areas from communication high five. Each week there was a different focus, different activity, and a different area of high five to focus on. So be wow words, face-to-face, thinking time, questions to comments, and signs, symbol, and objects. The resources from then shared with all the playrooms for practitioners to continue promoting this in their setting for any child who wished to use it. We were able to then track the child's progress from where they had, signpost parents to other professionals, and provide enriched experiences, quality interactions with parents, carers and practitioners. We held a drop-in session for our parents and carers where we share top tips from language therapists and also the contact numbers for parents to phone, the copies of the most common songs and nursery rhymes that we sang at home. We had library memberships for our parents to sign, times of the library opening, and also information about events in the library. And during this time, practitioners also promoted the nursery lending library and librarian visits. Previous to COVID, you know, we had stopped visits, so to get that up and running was great. So weekly visits were added back on, developing partnerships with our communities again during this time as well. And again, practitioners were using the lending libraries to promote stories. The library. Each we visited the library with a rota, so it gave an opportunity. Parents and carers were invited to join. In addition to this, we would also look at books. In addition to looking to events that were age and stage appropriate, including Book Bug, Lego Club and Scots Songs for Bairns. Children were very excited as during the language drop-in they were able to sign up and get their own library cards, which was 25% of our children and families being members. Thanks, Lisa.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Feedback from practitioners from the workshop for literacy share that they have a clear understanding of the experience and outcomes literacy, that they are providing a experience, ensuring that they're covering all the skills within the workshop for literacy. They are finding it easier to plan for next steps for children, especially in the early progressing areas. They are creating the wonder and enthusiasm with children to be about, whilst developing a lifelong love of reading. I have found it particularly useful in planning focus on their targets, and that they are developing that to allow the imagination and creative to develop our wonder. Consideration activities for primary one school. So I previously spoke about this when I was talking about baseline data, but what we did was we linked with so that practitioners could go up and see what for children's literacy development is and the impact of the early that we provide have on supporting children's literacy one and beyond. And that was really important for our practitioners because both alone naturally get to see how the children progress into primary. So for practitioners, it was the first time they were able to see children move on to learn how to read, to go on to writing sentences. It was really good to see what the work they're doing just now and how it provides. One teachers also came down to visit us, and they were understanding of the literacy experiences that we offer. We use to track progression and plan universal and target using the Living scale and our ELC. The primary one teacher also reflecting on the learning and how it adapted to incorporate some response. And at the time, consideration was being given to use the PLJs in primary for people still working in early initial engagement. And actually that has happened with one of our schools now using the PLJs and continuing them. The child is to move on to early progressing. One teacher also really benefit see how we used our learning cards and our they have been at developing their play across primary. This has been so successful that we are to do this primary one with a focus for literacy, but also a focus on numeracy for our improving for this. Looking at baseline data and our definitions of children going up, we found that 90% declaration accurate in N5 children working with an early progressing for literacy. So that really staff's confidence in being able to where a child was and they had met all the appropriate outcomes, have been a success. We also, when comparing the data from previous children who'd gone up to one, we were able to see that the workshop for tuning output effective in attainment and literacy, importance to make the declarations. So where are we now? We're continuing to use our workshop for literacy book in a library of workshop book bags that can be used across things. So that's what we're talking about, those grabs that have resources, the book planner and the generally planner in. So in up our library across both settings. These are being used daily by practitioners. We have for any new practitioners to the thing, so they're in with the workshop the approach. We have developed our book plans to include our current improvement practices, books that lend themselves to numeracy and experiences. Recently for these, our moderation work has continued with and feedback from we've adopted a approach to breaking down marks for new outcomes. For listening, that is the end of our presentation.